Next, let's talk about Revolt in 2100. It's a collection of three short stories. Not really. Misfit is very short. Coventry a bit longer. But the first story, If This Goes On, is more like a short novel. Originally published in 1940, If This Goes On is a story that's depicted on the cover of this version here. Um, a young soldier who fights for the religious. The United States at this time is under a religious authoritarian government, and this newly young soldier, just out of West Point, is appointed to the Palace Guard, and the story revolves around him falling in love and also, betraying his oath and becoming part of a conspiracy to overthrow the government and replace the political this religious political authority with a new democratic government. It's a great story. It revolves around his days in the some of his days in the palace, and his meeting the girl, escaping, becoming part of the revolution, hiding away in a with a group, and they're set up while they foment the revolution and get ready to actually attack the government when the time is right. Um, so great story. Like Heinlein's stuff, it also talks about his, some theories of government. There's a little bit about after the revolution and what kind of government they're going to set up and how to do it, because the people are kind of they've been brainwashed for 100 years to think that their leader is sent from God and is like a prophet slash half god or so himself. So there's some very interesting stuff. Heinlein describes some military action that's fairly realistic. Um, I loved the story when I first read it. I didn't know it was a short story. There was other short stories in this novel. I just got it because of the cover and the title, Revolt in 2100. Sounded great. The next story is Coventry, also a very good story that I enjoy. Much shorter, but it goes on to Heinlein's theory of government as well. In that the setup is that anyone who if you're socially unadjusted, i.e., like a criminal or do anything against the law, then you have two choices. You can be you can submit to a psychological reconditioning. Basically, they go and they tamper with your mind in order to make you less violent towards others, or you can go to Coventry. And Coventry is it's actually a great it's a great libertarian theory. The whole idea of the government is not right, or anyone is moral enough to choose for you what you should do. So you basically can do anything you want in this society, in this new United States, as long as it doesn't infringe upon the rights of others. So very libertarian. And even if you do infringe on those rights, you either get psychological reconditioning in order to purge you of those type of desires or thoughts, and then you can stay in society, or you can go the government withdraws itself from you. So you can go to this place called Coventry. It's a certain area of land that's surrounded by this impenetrable fence, and in you go. And there's no laws. There's no government in there. There's no the U.S. government has nothing to do with it, and whatever happens in there happens, and all the various misfits and those types of people who can't get along with the covenant get sent to Coventry, and they can do what they wish there. And it's a story about one character, David, who refuses to submit after he punched a guy in the face for insulting him. So he punches him in the face. He refuses to submit to psychological conditioning, and he's sent to Coventry. And the story's about that. A good story. Misfit is Coventry's also 1940. Misfit 1939 originally published. So these are all really early stories. Misfit is a little shorter story. It doesn't really fit with the theme of the other ones. It's a story about all these stories are set after the secular liberal society, in a secular liberal society that sort of comes out of the first book, or the first story, if this goes on, the overthrow of the religious authoritarian government. The other two stories take place in that society, and Misfit is it's a story about a character who he doesn't fit in society, and all these misfits are, they're sent, they go on they're sent various places, but they can choose to go on this. The main character chooses to go on the spaceship, and it goes out to the asteroid belt to get an asteroid and bring it back into Earth orbit. So it's a very short. That one is super short. 20 pages, something like that. Very short about a certain character, and I don't want to give the character's name is that it centers around is A.J. Libby, and I think you'll see him later on in other stories if you're so interested. So I won't give you much more about that, but you can look that up and see if A.J. Libby turns up anywhere else, like in the Lazarus Slong series. All right, that does it for Revolt in 2100. I recommend it again as well, of course. And if this goes on as a great story, with action and adventure, a little bit of romance, the character coming of age, everything. A bit of conspiracy, and personally I'm interested in stories where they build a cell structure and try to revolt against some sort of authority or government, and how they do that. And this has some of that in it as well. So Revolt in 2100 by Heinlein, check it out. Next, let's talk about Tunnel in the Sky by Heinlein. This is one of his juvenile novels, but I don't find it very juvenile. It doesn't have the free love and orgy and all those sort of things in it that you find in some of the other, the social commentary, libertarian stuff that you find in other Heinlein novels. But it's just a good story, and I always enjoyed it, and I still enjoy it reading it as an adult, even though it's technically part of his juvenile series of novels. Anyway, the story centers around the character Rod Walker, who is 17, 18 years old, basically at the end of his high school career. And in this version of the universe, the humans have discovered a way to open up a gate between Earth and other worlds, kind of like Stargate, and I would guess that probably Stargate stole something like that from Heinlein, most likely. But anyway, so this has opened up planets, innumerable planets across the galaxy for man to colonize, and they can colonize it by simply opening up a gate, which of course costs, it's expensive in terms of energy, but you open the gate up and you just step from from our world to another world. So this happens often. There's a scene at the beginning of the novel where the main character Rod goes to this location, and you can see people moving from the gate. So it's described in detail where the gate is open, and you see these colonists going across, and you'll see tons of cattle, and then a bunch of people in wagons with all kinds of various things going off to colonize a new world, while a TV announcer describes it. It's very interesting. Just a little with Heinlein's libertarian bent. The character of Rod he's got to put coins into like a viewer, like those old television viewers you used to see at airports. I don't know, maybe in the 80s or something. You sit down and you watch TV. You put coins in and you can watch TV. And he sort of has to do something like that in order to, get the commentary and about what's going on, where they're going to, and description by the people. So a little bit of the free market getting into there. But anyway, the story. Rod Walker's taking a course in high school, and it's about colonization. And part of their final exam is they're sent for 2 weeks to some untamed colony world, and they have to survive there. And they're allowed to bring whatever they want: guns, weapons, any types of survival equipment. This is their final exam. They go there. They have to. They're released. They have to live in the wild with other students too. I mean, and anything goes. There's no police. There's no nothing. They could be killed by wild animals or by their peers. Anything. They've got to survive. So in this story, for some reason, the gate is supposed to open after 2 weeks, but it doesn't. And the story revolves around Rod and other students. Some of them are slightly old. Most of them are 17, 18, but there's apparently some sort of college course, I guess, because a few of them are in their early 20s. But they get together, and it revolves around the society that they set up for the society that they set up. I won't give you any more because I don't want to go away, but I don't want to give too much away. But needless to say, there's conflicts between, not everybody gets along. There are conflicts between some characters, and of course, they don't know, if they're ever going to be rescued, and they start to develop a society and pair up. And I believe there's 1 or 2 babies. They have, they got to deal with, animals, everything. So it's just a good little story. And I enjoy it even as an adult. And as I said, even though it's part of his juvenile group of stories, I still highly recommend it. And if you like those kind of adventure stories, the humans, overcoming each other and also the elements, it's a great little book. Give it a try. Thank you. Next, let's talk about Time Enough for Love. So it's a collection of short stories. Well, I mean, they're not that short. They're a little bit long. But collection of stories that focus around Lazarus Long and some of the themes that come out whenever Heinlein writes about Long. So the first one is, which I greatly enjoyed. It's called "The Tale of the Man Who Was Too Lazy to Fail," and it's a story told by Lazarus Long, and it implies that there's some implication that maybe the story is false in the name of the character it talks about, and it's actually how Lazarus Long is. But the man who's too lazy to fail. So it's a story about a guy who's so lazy he always tries to find a way to make things easiest for himself, and by doing that he becomes very successful through life. The theory is called the principle is called constructive laziness, and he it's a whole story of his life and how well he does in life just by simply trying to do the least amount of work possible. Maybe a life lesson there for anyone. The next story is The Tale of the Twins Who Weren't, and it's a story about when Lazarus Long is an interplanetary cargo trader. He's moving planet to planet trading. He buys a pair of slaves who are brother and sister, but they're brother and sister but unrelated genetically. They're young. He buys them. He takes them, educates them, and teaches them how to be human during while he's moving to the next, going to his next planet. So because they've been together all the time, and this is a way for Heinlein to talk about, one way for him to talk about examine incest. So they're brother and sister, but they're not genetically related, and they eventually marry each other. And Lazarus Long is telling them, don't tell anyone you're brother and sister. Um, but they do get married, and later on he sets them up, and they open up a business on the planet that he puts them on. So yeah, so it's kind of it's a story of turning slaves into humans, so to speak, but also a little bit about that examining incest, and how we we perceive that and deal with it. The next one is A Tale of the Adopted Daughter, which is Lazarus Long while on this planet with a bunch of other colonists. He ones who don't know that he's super long lived. He There's a fire. He saves a little girl out of the fire. The parents throw her out the window while their place is burning up. He arranges to have her raised in the town where they are, and eventually, after she grows up, he marries her, and they move out of town into some far off area, and start their own little town, and new some small new other have series of things going on, adventures, and some other people move to this valley, and they establish a little bit of a town there. Of course, this woman girl is short-lived, so after 80 or 90 years she becomes very old, and he hasn't really aged, so she dies, and he moves on. So it kind of pointedly shows how his life, he moves through phases of his life, establishing himself somewhere, getting married, having children, and then at some point moving on to his next thing, which is why he's described as being a guy who's done just about everything. The next short story is called Boondock. I don't think that's the best of it. It's more of a look at. So I should say that all these stories revolve around the fact that Lazarus Long is a bit of a hero in the families, which were the name of all the group that got together. There was a group back, well, probably about 100 or more years before our present time, which got together and encouraged people who were long-lived to marry other people who were long-lived in order to try to naturally defeat the aging process. So and of course at some point technology advances enough that that's not even that's not as much a concern, but there are a group of people on the earth who live extremely long lives compared to the rest. So that's the whole the Lazarus Long series focuses on him and the people like him, his relations, throughout a sort of a 2,000-year period from about 1900 on to about the year 4000, when and the adventures of Lazarus Long, who is the longest living of anyone, and lives long enough that they can start to treat people so that he can live effectively forever. So Boondock is a story of he's lost enthusiasm for life, and he's he wants to kill himself, or he's just been letting himself slowly die without looking after himself, without going for treatments that they regularly have to go for. And of course, because he's the oldest, basically the oldest man, the oldest human alive, and he's got all his innumerable amount of descendants. They find him and bring him back to a clinic to treat him. Of course, they can't treat him because of the libertarian bent of Heinlein and of the society. They can't treat him just without his permission. So they have to. they have to wait for him to, want to live life again, and there's various ways of doing that. But these sort of stories come out of him telling these stories and their attempt to engage him in order to bring back that verve of life, but also to get information about the most famous, from their view, the most famous person in the universe, to get stories about his life. So that's what Boondock sort of does. But once they get over that, you know, Lazarus gathers his family together, and they move to a new planet, and they start going from there for adventures. So Da Capo is probably the main story of the book in my view, and in it Lazarus tries to travel back to 1919 to experience the time when he grew up as an adult. He gets back a little early on the eve of World War One, and he falls in love with his own mother, and because he wants, they talk about World War One as being, World War Two not so much, but World War One being as very much a, I don't know if you've heard of the Four Feathers. I believe that's a movie, probably based on a novel. Women at the time during World War One, if they saw men walking around, not in the army, not serving, they would give them a feather, which would say, basically, are you a coward? How come you're not fighting for your country back then? So, I think it's part of the reason why men would wear their uniform when they were on leave, to show that they're in the army, they're just on leave. But anyway, so Lazarus has to. He decides to enlist the army simply because his mother is, or his mother, who doesn't know it's her son, is, loses respect for him. He wants to, keep her esteem, so he joins the army, even though he's, not big on organized fighting at all. But yeah, so during the course of this, he meets his like younger 5-year-old self, as well as falling in love with his mother, and trying to consummate their mutual attraction. So there's some interesting themes of incest and that sort of thing in there, which he talks about as well. So yeah, Heinlein does not shy away from all sorts of topics which many people would consider icky, perhaps, as to use a technical term. His mother Maureen is seen in, at one point she disappears, but she's also seen in some other stories later, which is kind of interesting how he weaves them together. I don't think he, planned it that way, but it fits together later on. Anyway, I recommend Time Enough for Love and all of the Lazarus Long. It's interesting. I find it interesting to read about his thoughts about various topics. You can see the cover of the novel there. That is Lazarus Long pontificating in the front there. The computer fits into other things, and the two red-headed, Lazarus Long is a redhead, the two red-headed naked girls beside him are his, they're clones of himself in female form, and they're twins. And of course he, later in Boondock, he sets up a polyamorous family, and these his twin clones are part of that. So I don't want to get into that too much, but yeah, like I said, some interesting thoughts about life and how we should live it. So let me just talk quickly about other Lazarus Long type stories. So The Number of the Beast, which is another bunch of short stories, and Time Enough for Love, all relate to somewhat to Lazarus Long.